I'm going to be honest. I am really excited about today's presentation. We've been talking a lot about advocacy this year as we've watched the completion of 2 phase 3 clinical trials, and both have had encouraging results. We are at a very important moment in PWS history, and as we prepare for the very first advisory committee meeting as part of the FDA review of Carbetocin, which is also known as LV101, for the treatment of PWS. Today, we will be providing an overview of Carbetocin's development journey, the purpose of the FDA's advisory committee meeting, and most importantly, how you can make the greatest impact as this committee reviews the Carbetocin application. So joining me today for this presentation is FPWR's Director of Research Programs, Dr. Teresa Strong, and CEO of PWSA USA, Paige Rivard. Welcome.
Hey, Susan.
So let's go ahead and jump right into things. It has been a long journey for Carbetocin to get where it is today. In fact, Carbetocin was first studied in people with PWS in a phase 2 trial that was sponsored by Ferring Pharmaceuticals about 7 years ago. So in 2019, Levo Therapeutics began their phase 3 CARE PWS trial, and preliminary data showing the positive benefits of Carbetocin were shared mid last year. This summer, Levo Therapeutics submitted their new drug application to the FDA, and that started a 6-month clock for the review process. So next month, on November 4th, the FDA will be seeking advice regarding the approvability of Carbetocin at an advisory committee meeting. This is an optional meeting that the FDA has chosen to schedule. At the end of this meeting, the advisory meeting on November 4th, the committee will provide their recommendations to the FDA, and we expect to hear a final decision regarding the Carbetocin new drug application by the end of the year. So looking at today at the slide that we have here, you'll see this meeting, I hope you can see my mouse, it's an optional meeting, and it's held relatively towards the end of the approval process. I would like to point out that Soleno Therapeutics drug DCCR has also completed a phase 3 trial. You can see here where my mouse is at. Okay, currently they are in open dialogues with the FDA as well. And it's our hopes that they will be able to submit a new drug application as well in the near future. After they submit that new drug application, the FDA at its discretion may choose to conduct another advocacy committee meeting to discuss DCCR. And of course, we'll be ready to support that application as well. So to give us some information about patient involvement and the 21st Century Cures Act, I'd like to give over the mic to Teresa.
Thanks, Susan. Great to be here. So as a little bit of background, the 21st Century Cures Act was signed into law, I believe in late 2016. And the overall goal of that act was to foster innovation and to accelerate how quickly medical products got to patients. And one really important provision of that law was the patient-focused drug development component. And that really prioritized the input of patients and their caregivers and families into the process of drug development and also drug approval. So it formalized and prioritized the FDA's gathering input from patients about important aspects that kind of puts the drug approval process into context. So for example, the FDA can now look to the patient community and ask questions such as, what is the unmet need in your community? And what are the daily impacts of this disorder? What treatments does the patient community prioritize? And what would be a meaningful change? What would a treatment have to do to bring meaningful change? And so, this law and then the changes at the FDA in response to that law have made this process, all a bit more prioritized and transparent. Susan, I think we can move on to the next slide.
Great. Thank you again to Susan and Teresa for inviting me to participate in this today. You may be asking, what is an advisory committee meeting? And again, we're all learning this. This is the first time we've been through this, but basically an advisory committee meeting is a way for the FDA to gain advice or recommendations which contribute to its decision-making process. The committee will discuss efficacy, safety, and the risk-benefit profile of a new drug application. There is a statutory requirement related to this process, which includes a minimum requirement to have at least a 60-minute session dedicated to an open public hearing. And this section of the meeting allows the FDA to obtain advice from experts who work outside the government and to encourage patients, healthcare providers, and others to share their views. The FDA sets the agenda and questions, and you can see these in advance as the advisory committee meetings are officially announced through the Federal Register on the FDA website. Next slide. So who is on an advisory committee? An advisory committee is normally made up of 9 standing or voting members and a chairperson. It can include individuals such as, we have here statisticians, consumer reps, industry reps, physicians, and patient representatives. Members are selected for their knowledge and expertise specific to the committee's function and are normally appointed for a term of 1 to 4 years. Each member of the committee has a role, and the chair's role is to conduct all aspects of the meeting, including making sure that the meeting has a balanced presentation between both the FDA and the sponsor company. The chair also ensures the adherence to the agenda and to make sure that the open public hearing is properly conducted. Next slide. This is just a sample agenda. Normally, an advisory committee meeting is held in person, but due to our current situation, meetings are being conducted virtually. And in the case of the advisory committee meeting with Levo, which will be held, as Susan mentioned, on November 4th, it will begin at 10 a.m. Eastern Time and end at 4 p.m. The meeting will be called to order. They'll start off reviewing conflicts of interest. The FDA will provide opening remarks, and then they'll go right into the sponsor presentation. After the sponsor presents, the FDA will present, and next will be the open public hearing. And this section will be from, again, 1:30 to 2:30. And this is a time where families and organizations and providers and other experts can address the committee directly and share their stories or information they feel will be impactful to the committee to hear. There will be discussion after that, and finally a vote. And you may attend the entire day's session if you would like, or just come in and listen to the open public hearing. The preview information can be found again on the Federal Register website. And I think we have that link possibly, or we can put it in the chat. Again, this is just a sample agenda of what you might expect if you plan to attend the meeting. And I will now turn it back over to Teresa, I believe.
Yeah, thanks, Paige. So I think it's good for our community to understand when the FDA is making decisions about drug approvals and when the advisory committee, which is a separate group, is considering whether they're going to recommend approval or not. They do this in the context of a benefit risk framework, and that's shown here. It's kind of like those rubrics that your kids have for book reports and things. They'll put down information about the condition, and that includes what's, the severity of the disorder, the impact on the patients. They'll look at current treatment options. And I think here's where we can make clear to both the advisory committee and to the FDA that we currently don't have drugs that address hyperphagia effectively, or, some of the anxiety that we see in our kids effectively. They'll look at the data and look at what is the benefit of the drug, right? And I think it's important they're going to be looking at the numbers, right? So it's a 6-point decrease in the HQCT or a 10-point decrease in, the PADQ or something like that. And where our community can put some flavor behind that, really what they're looking for from our community is that meaningful to us? So does 5 points mean anything? And I think that's what our role is in this process. And finally, they'll look at the risk. So they'll look at the safety profile. And again, to put that in context for our community, I think it's important for them to understand what level of risk the patient community is willing to accept. And because PWS is a life-threatening disorder, we're willing to probably accept a more risk than if it were not a life-threatening disorder, if it were not a really, debilitating disorder for many of our kids. So again, this is what they'll be considering as they weigh that risk benefit and decide whether or not to approve the process. And then they'll be looking to the patient community to put some of the context around that. So next slide, Susan. So I think this is where, we can all sort of sit and think about what is the information that the FDA needs from the patient community, and what's the best way to get that across. And I think, so our organizations have worked together to do a number of surveys on, for example, risk tolerance and, caregiver, what we call caregiver burden, which looks at, how a disorder or disease affects, not only the person, but the family. So we'll be submitting all of that information. We've previously submitted it to the FDA, but as Paige mentioned, the advisory committee is a separate group of individuals. They probably have some familiarity with PWS, but they are not necessarily PWS experts. So we'll submit the information that we've already gathered in the form of, like large surveys. We have a patient voices, which many of you contributed to, that talks about disease impact. But I think for this purpose, what they're really looking for is those personal perspectives on what this drug would mean to, our loved ones. So these are some of the points that I think the patient community can make. And, the first is the unmet need. So I think, again, the advisory committee likely to be familiar with PWS, but may not understand the real day-to-day impact of PWS on us, on our kids, on their ability to be independent in life. And they may not understand, how serious and life-threatening it could be. So that is point number one that we can begin to make. And I don't know, Paige or Susan, if you have any thoughts about, how we can convey that, approaches we might take to convey that. Or not. we could let's go through them all and then maybe we can discuss them. So I think the second thing is, what would an improvement mean to you? So I think one of the things that we'd like to get across to the FDA is, that we don't need hyperphagia to be completely eliminated in order for it to have a meaningful impact on our kids' lives. So if we could sort of, as Elizabeth Ruth says, turn the dimmer switch down on the hyperphagia, on the anxiety, on some of the behaviors, it would actually have a really big impact on our kids. And I think that, is a second important point to get across, that, the changes that we see within the context of this clinical trial are likely to have real benefits to the day-to-day living of our kids, to their ability to function in the world. Maybe now they can go to new social activities that they couldn't go to before. So, how does that sort of 6-point change in the HQCT translate to more things that they can do, more participation that they can have? I think it's difficult sometimes for people who don't live with PWS to understand how restrictive PWS can be, and how, that's really detrimental to our kids. The fact that we're constantly having to restrict them from, big social events and things, and monitor them so closely, and how that might make a difference.
Yeah.
The other thing, yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, Teresa, I was just, we're talking about the meaningful improvement. And there's certain things that certainly limit our family from being able to do outings at certain times. Jaden's anxiety peaks and wanes, and depending on where we're at in that cycle, sometimes going out as a family is very difficult. Frankly, it's not the hyperphagia that prevents us from going out. It's some of those behaviors. And if we were able to get him to slow down and perhaps lengthen that fuse so that he could think through a challenge, we'd be able to go out. And I think that's that's one thing that we need to express to the FDA is we don't have to cure everything. We just need to be able to treat treat enough of the symptoms that we can have a more typical life with our kids.
Yeah, exactly. And I think if we have sort of illustrations of that, because again, our role is to provide the context, right? They've got the numbers and they've got the statistics, but if we can provide concrete examples of what that would mean to our loved ones, I think that's really important.
And Teresa, I think even just reiterating, today we don't have anything. So something is what we would like the choice. We would like to have a choice of something. So I think that comment will help as well.
This week, we've seen a huge interest in families in our behavior and anxiety sessions. Clearly, those are issues to a lot of us. There's no treatments for those in PWS that have been tested in PWS. So oftentimes, my family included, we have worked with doctors to try drugs, but none of them have been tested in PWS. Some of them have some benefit, others have none, but we're testing these other drugs for, again, an indication that they've never been approved for, just hoping that they'll work. It'd be great if we could have a treatment that addresses at least some symptoms and has been FDA approved specifically and tested specifically in Prader-Willi syndrome. So we have an idea of what we can expect in our population.
Exactly. I think that really gets to the risk tolerance question. So, the FDA will be looking at what is the risk of this drug. And I think one thing that is really nice is that the clinical trial showed, really very modest risk with this drug. But to your point, Susan, a lot of our families, it's not like we're living with risk in a couple of ways. Number one, our kids are at risk with the hyperphagia because they can get into all kinds of trouble, food seeking. And number two, to your point, families are trying drugs, and they're drugs that have some pretty significant side effects to try to manage the behavior. So when we're talking about risk tolerance, I think conveying that we're not going from zero risk to some risk. We're already at risk. Our kids are already at risk. And with this drug, we have something that was tested in a large group of individuals with PWS, which is not the case for any of the other behavioral medications that our kids are on. So I think that's a great point. Another aspect is our willingness to accept uncertainty of benefit, right? So the FDA gets really focused on, because it's their job and that's, it's the law as well. They don't want to approve a drug that does not show benefit, right? So that's why they have to have substantial evidence of benefit. But there's a kind of a flip side to that, to what degree do you have to show 100% that it is beneficial? And there is a risk from our community standpoint that they would be seeking so much benefit, or so so many zeros on the significance, that they might not approve a drug that is effective, right? And so it's that uncertainty of benefit. We're never going to be 100% positive that a drug is beneficial. So at what point do you kind of say, okay, it's, it meets a standard of substantial benefit, and then we learn, post-marketing. So I think conveying that, we as a patient community understand that this drug may not be 100% effective for 100% of kids, but that we would like the opportunity to work with our doctor and see if this is right for, for our kids, is another important point to be trying to convey, that we are tolerant, given that it's a rare community, given that it is so difficult to do clinical trials, large clinical trials, given that the risks of this drug look pretty low, we're willing to accept, not doing a trial of 1,000 people before we decide yay or nay.
Right. I think a great example of that, Teresa, is N-acetylcysteine, or also known as NAC, right? So many people in our community have tried this for skin picking. Oftentimes, in conjunction with their doctor, they work with their doctor to determine a dosage. The point is they get to try it. It hasn't worked for every individual with PWS, but for the people that it has worked for, they've gone from having scabs all over their body to having healed skin. And that's the advantage of having an FDA approved drug, is you can actually have the opportunity to try this. And I would say, as a parent, I want to have the opportunity to be able to try Carbetocin, because it could work wonders on my child. And at the worst case, he may be not as responsive, but I want the opportunity to try that.
Yeah, great point. And a final argument that I think we can make, although we have to make it carefully, right, is that doing additional large trials are going to be really difficult in this population. So the pandemic continues, right? It is hard to get our kids to clinical trial sites and get studies done anyway. And there are particular challenges with PWS, right? So when we take our kids to, we have to travel to a study site, then oftentimes we're staying overnight at a hotel, and there's, all kinds of food opportunities there. It's disruption to routine, which is so difficult for our kids anyway. So getting clinical trials done is very difficult in the population. We're still in a pandemic. So, how long is it going to be before, Levo, even, best intentions, sets up a huge clinical trial? Like, how long is it going to be before we can do that and be confident in the outcome measures, which in many cases are based on, what's going on at home. So they're a little bit more subjective outcome measures. And, just getting across that the lag time, is really detrimental to our patient population. So, the FDA wants to feel confident that a drug is safe. They want to feel confident that's effective. And like we do too, but realistically, stretching the timeline out, if they have enough information to feel comfortable moving forward, I mean, obviously it would be better for our patient community to, get the approval now. And again, to Susan's point, have people work with their doctors and, look more at efficacy over the long time with an approved drug.
The unfortunate reality is we have nothing now, and the amount of time to do a large clinical trial is extensive. And if we are comfortable and confident that this drug is safe, we can work with our doctors to continue that safety with our children while they get the benefits from being on drug. I've heard stories, Teresa, about people traveling with their kids. And as you said, it can be really, really hard, especially if you have a child who likes to elope or gets stressed in situations, traveling through the airport with a grown adult individual with PWS who's having a temper tantrum can be a challenge. So those are just examples that we're bringing up to you, in our members of our community, because we're asking that you think about some of these items and provide written comments to the FDA. If you feel strongly about getting Carbotocin approved for your loved one, these are some points that the FDA would like to hear about. And we hope that you will consider writing your own perspective and perhaps give some light to your journey, because they have the data. Now they need our faces, essentially. They need our stories to see that these are real individuals who are having a real impact or being impacted by Prader-Willi.
Yeah, I agree. And I think maybe we can move to the next slide, which is really about, we know many in our community have actually been on Carbetocin. And for those individuals in particular, I think it is, they have a particular perspective that is really important, both to the advisory committee and to the FDA regulators themselves. I mean, I think an important point here is that it is an advisory committee meeting. I would guess that the FDA regulators who are ultimately going to make the decision are going to be listening, right? And those regulators don't have another opportunity to hear from the patient community. So yes, you're talking to the advisory committee members, and I think that's a really, we need to focus on that. But you're also kind of talking to the FDA regulators who will ultimately make the decision. I think we've said that the FDA can take the advice of the advisory committee, but they're not obliged to, so they can decide differently. And I think, some of the things, again, they'll be looking at the statistics and they'll be looking at the, the numbers, but the opportunity to really help them understand what is meaningful to patients is great here. And I think that if individuals who have been participating in the Carbotocin study and can really speak to that, like how did this, change my child and our family and our ability to, go to school, have social activities, that will be really key.
Absolutely. And so we're going to go into how to submit comments in later slides as well as deadlines. But here we really just, if you participated in the Carbotocin clinical trial, your observations could be very, very meaningful. And so we wanted to provide you with some points that you might want to consider as you draft your comments. When I refer to comments, I'm referring to a document or letter that you can submit to the FDA. There are no length limits on your written comments, so you can write as much detail as you like. And if submitted by the deadline, they will review those comments prior to the advisory committee meeting. So as Paige mentioned, at the committee meeting, there will be about an hour of time reserved for public commentary. Those will be oral presentations. They will be limited in time. They'll be very short, meaning the oral presenter has to be very concise. But in the written comments, you can get into as much detail as you want. So again, if you participated in the clinical trial, how has it changed your relationship or your child's relationship with food? Has anxiousness changed? What did it look like before treatment? What does it look like now? Was your child rigid prior to beginning treatment? How does that look now? And most importantly, what is the most important way that Carbotocin has changed your life and your child's life? I've heard personal anecdotes from several families now. One mom was able to go back to work. She wasn't able to work before her child was in this trial. Another mom, her child was an extensive food seeker, and now her daughter, instead of eating food from the trash or off the floor, is bringing her unopened food, like, hey, this was left out. I'm not supposed to eat this. So these are some very important details that we hope that you can share with the FDA as they pertain to you. So again, super important that the FDA hears these personal stories about the drug has benefited not just the person with PWS, but also the family. So we strongly encourage everyone who's had a positive experience on this drug to submit a thoughtful comment to the advisory committee for their consideration. Teresa or Paige, did you want to add anything before I go to the next slide? Okay.
Well, I can add one thing, Susan. I think it is really important to talk about the impact on the entire family. I think, if sort of the family is able to go out to more things and mom's able to go back to work, these are critical things. But the decision, just so you know, will be made based on the patient, right? So the patient is the one that's taking the drug. The patient is the one that, is assuming the risk of the drug. And so while I think it's really impactful because a happy family makes for a happy person with PWS. So, that's really important, but the focus on the individual with PWS, are they, better able to focus on school, for example, those kinds of things are critical as well.
Absolutely. So Teresa mentioned earlier, FPWR and PWSA will jointly be submitting a very extensive document to the advisory committee that includes information from the patient listening session that we held earlier this year. And it includes references to about a dozen different resources for their consideration. However, we would like for you to submit a thoughtful comment as well. So if you would like to submit comments to the advisory committee, you'll need to visit this website. Again, I'm going to share these slides with everyone, so you will have these links after today's webinar. You don't have to be furiously writing it down just yet. You'll note that it has a comment field as well as a file upload. We suggest that you do not use the comment field because that's going to send your text with, it's going to remove all of the formatting and it's going to be rather challenging to read. Instead, submit your comment, preferably by a PDF or a Word document. And that will ensure that your formatting is preserved and the readability of your comment is maximized. You will need to provide an email address. And then at the bottom of the form, it will ask you to select who are you? You're an individual. It's really important to know, and I can't emphasize this enough. The advisory committee is not going to be counting how many comments are submitted. This is not a voting contest. So we do not need to flood their inbox with comments. What we do need are thoughtful comments with meaningful content that really speak to why this treatment should be approved for PWS. So we're asking community members, of course, we want you to be involved. We also need you to put some thought into your comments. And, again, we're going to be sharing the slide deck with you. Review some of the points that we've shared with you today to help bolster your testimony. A copy of the slide deck will be sent to you so you can use it to prepare. And of course, we're happy to provide you with feedback, even grammatical editing for anyone who wants to take advantage of that. It's just a second set of eyes on your comments. So if you want to get that second set of eyes, you're welcome to send myself or Paige a draft, and we'll provide you with some feedback. Again, this is just to help support you if you're a little nervous about anything. And I will send you email addresses later in the email to help you.
Susan, can I just make a point about that as well? I mean, we also need to be realistic, right? This advisory committee meeting, they're going to be reviewing all of the data that Levo has provided carefully. So they're going to have a lot to read through. So again, I think, we do want comments. We want to show support and the need of the community. But to Susan's point that, maybe not Aunt Mary's comment, right? Maybe just the comment of the people that are most affected. And if you are going to submit a comment and you have been in the trial, I think I would lead with that, because, they'll get the advisory committee will get all the comments, and, if they're like most of us, they'll just kind of flip through. So if you're in the trial, I would kind of, say that up front. So maybe it catches their attention. And to Susan's point, I think the longer comments with a lot of detail are great. Also, some short, pithy points are really good too. So if they're scrolling through those comments, they'll have the opportunity to look at both.
Yeah, the advisory committee is made of people just like us. They're people too. So sometimes keeping things short and to the point is helpful, so that they will read your points and not get lost. All right, so here's some dates to remember. So the first date is coming up. It's next Wednesday, October 13th. This is for individuals who want to request speaking time at the advisory committee. Again, speaking time is extremely limited, so we recommend you only request a speaking slot if you participated in the trial and you can articulately describe the impact this drug has had in a very short period of time. We expect, speaking spots will be limited to maybe 3 minutes or so. So they're going to be brief. If more individuals request a speaking time than what they can realistically provide, then slots will be given out on a lottery basis. So if you request a speaking slot, you'll be notified on October 14th if you've been awarded time. And if selected, we would love for you to reach out to either Paige or myself. We're going to be providing support to our oral presenters and just giving them opportunities to practice prior to the live meeting. All right, the next deadline is the deadline to submit written comments to the advisory committee, and that's October 21st. Comments that are received after that date will be reviewed by the FDA, but they will not be seen by the advisory committee. So if you want to get the greatest audience, you want to get those written comments in by the 21st. And the final day to submit comments, period, for the FDA's review will be November 3rd. Paige mentioned earlier, this is a public meeting. It will take place from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. Eastern time on November 4th. Everyone is welcome to attend. I personally encourage all of you. You might be at work, you might be washing dishes, put it on in the background. This is a momentous historical moment for all of us, and it's great for you to hear, what were the questions, what was presented, and of course, to hear the outcome of that meeting. The community comments will likely take place between 1:30 and 2:30 Eastern time, but that could vary slightly. So tune into that meeting, regardless of the outcome. It's truly going to be a historic day. So with that, we're going to open it up to Q&A, and we'll try to get through as many questions as we can.
And Susan, while you're looking at questions and things, you know, I mean, I'll just comment. This is a public forum. We would welcome if you wanted us to look at comments or wanted to, you know, bounce some ideas off, you know, Paige or Susan or you're more than welcome. But I mean, obviously, if we're not saying that you need to, right? You can do what you want. We're not looking to sort of influence the process. So I just want to be clear about that. If you want to just plow ahead and you know, please do. But if you want someone to discuss it with, or, you know, we're also happy to do that.
Right. We're just trying to provide support and help for anyone who's looking to get involved with that. All right. So we're getting a couple questions. How do we tune into that meeting? What's the link? We're going to give that link. There's going to be a follow-up email later this afternoon that will include the link so that you can go and you can submit your comments. There's also a web page that you can, that we'll link to for you, that will allow you to join the meeting. The actual link to that meeting will not be available till a couple of days before, along with the agenda. But the link that we give you the FDA will populate that page with the access.
And there'll also be a briefing document. So I think both Levo and the FDA reviewers will have to have a document of kind of the data and their analyses. And I think all of that goes public as well.
Mm-hmm. Teresa, are minutes from the meeting available afterwards, or do they record the meeting?
They do record the meeting. I'm not sure about minutes, but they will have all of the material that was reviewed at the meeting, you know, publicly available. They'll have a recording of the meeting on the FDA website, and then they'll have the outcome. So I'm not sure about minutes, but everything else.
Mm-hmm. So it was mentioned that the advisory committee will provide, at the end of that day of the meeting itself, will provide a recommendation to the FDA. But the FDA doesn't have to heed that recommendation. So why do we have an advisory committee meeting?
Well, I think there are probably people in the drug development. If anyone has been watching the Alzheimer's drug, you know, there's been a lot of controversy actually, which I hope does not impact, you know, PWS. So there was an advisory committee meeting for an Alzheimer's drug. The advisory committee recommended against it, and the FDA approved it. And there's been all kinds of backlash. And you know, a couple of the people resigned from the advisory committee, you know, just on that, like, what am I doing here if you're not going to take our recommendation? So, so there has been some controversy, and it is recent, and it's, you know, I think we would all love there not to be controversy. But I think the point of having an advisory committee meeting is when the FDA, A, is seeking some outside advice, and B, wants the process to be transparent. So with a drug approval process, normally, you know, the FDA is bound by confidentiality. They're going to review the data, they're going to make a decision, and then it's going to come out in the public, right? With an advisory committee meeting, everybody gets to see the data, everybody gets to see the sponsor's interpretation of the data. Everybody gets to see the FDA's interpretation of the data. The advisory committee will ask questions, probably of both. There'll be public comment. So it's all a much more transparent, open process. And you know, everybody presumably will be able to see each other's thinking in a way that I think the FDA feels will be beneficial in the end.
Next question, how can people who have not yet been in trials with actual data, and how can they help advocate? So they haven't participated in the trial, maybe their child is too young to have been eligible. What can they do?
I mean, I think, you know, having the FDA understand the impact of PWS on the person with PWS is an important point to make. I think, you know, maybe you focus on one of the bullet points that we had that you can really speak to get those points across. You know, has your experience been that, you know, it's a life-threatening disorder, for example? You know, some people will have that experience where it was. Other people will have the experience of, how it has impacted their child's ability to focus at school, for example. And conveying that you would like the opportunity to try this drug and see if it, work with your doctor, try the drug and see if it has efficacy for your child, like that's really important to you. I think that's the way you can convey that. Again, I think the people who have been in the trial and can speak directly to that question of, did it make a meaningful difference? That is another thing that is going to be really important to this advisory committee. But there are other points that other people can make as well.
Mm-hmm. This is a great question coming in. What were some of the problems or concerns that came up in the study that the committee might be thinking about?
So I think, and this is my interpretation of the data that I've seen that everybody else has seen, right? So the safety profile, I think, looked good for this drug. I think, and I'm not a clinician, that's my other disclaimer. I'm going to do a few disclaimers, but I don't think any unexpected safety issues came up. So I don't think there's safety concerns. But the decrease in hyperphagia, it was, I don't remember the exact numbers. I believe it was, like a difference between placebo and HQCT of maybe 3 or 4 points. And then later on in the extension data, it got, it got better. But I think having them understand what is a 4 or an 8-point difference in HQCT mean to our kids is really important. And the other thing, one of the other major measures was the PADQ, right? So the PWS Anxiousness and Distress Questionnaire. And that was developed in collaboration. Levo Therapeutics led it, but they got a lot of collaboration from FPWR, including myself and Lauren, who's also a PWS mom. As many of you know, Sarah Cotter, who is CEO of Levo Therapeutics, is a PWS mom, and lots of input from the community on that instrument. But the FDA and nor the advisory committee, they've never seen this instrument before. So one thing that they're really going to be interested in is, are those questions, which included repetitive questioning, which all of us, with older kids are very familiar with, anxiousness about change of schedule, anxiousness about, when the food is coming. Is that meaningful to our community, and would reducing that anxiety be important to our community? And I think because the PADQ is a new instrument, and because they're looking to use Carbetocin to reduce that PWS anxiousness and distress, that is a really important place where people who are not in the trial can say, this is a really important problem. And people who were in the trial who saw changes, benefits, can speak to what an improvement it's made.
I did get a comment that full transcripts will be posted on the FDA's website after the meeting. It usually takes a few weeks for them to get posted. So if you miss the meeting in person, those transcripts will be available. And I'm sure that you're going to be hearing from us as well, what the overall outcome was. But if you want to see the details, the FDA will post those. I think we have time for maybe 1 or 2 more questions. Great question coming in. Paige, maybe you'd like to take this one. Should I ask my family and friends to submit a comment?
I think, we talked about that a little bit earlier, that you can certainly do that. I mean, if you feel compelled and passionate to do that, certainly do it. But what we really think is going to be important for the committee is to hear from the individuals that either participated in the trial or from the families themselves, to give a real understanding of how this might impact you and your family members.
Again, to this point that, they are people, and if they have to sort through 10,000 comments to get to the comments, and we're not going to have any control of that. Like, so when we did advocacy for Soleno, we pulled out the comments and sort of ordered them by like family members or people on the trial. We're not involved in this process. And so if there are, if there's a lot of noise among the really critical comments, there's a downside to that, I guess.
Right. So yes, we hope that people in the community will provide comments, but we also we really would like to see thoughtfulness placed into those comments. Consider the readability of those comments. We want to make an impact and not just make noise. There's a great question in here. Since we can't attend in person for them to see our cute kids, because they are cute kids, would a PDF doc with a picture of our child along with a comment transmit? If you submit a PDF, it will maintain all of your formatting. So if you insert a photo into that PDF, they will absolutely see that photo. Okay, we have one last final question. How long after the AdCom meeting will we know if Carbotocin has been approved?
So I believe the AdCom votes that day, or in most cases, so we'll know their recommendation that day. And then my understanding is that, given that the new drug application was submitted over the summer, before the end of the year, the FDA will make its decision. I don't know the exact dates, but that's kind of a timeline. So the AdCom meeting in early November, and then a decision from FDA, I believe. And again, I'm not speaking for Leva, so if I get it wrong, I apologize, but listen to them before the end of the year.
So we could be sitting on pins and needles for the next month and a half. But I know that we're all hoping for the same outcome. Teresa and Paige, thank you so much for joining us today for this webinar. I hope that everyone has found it helpful. Again, we will be following up with the recording, the slides, and links. So please watch your inbox. If you don't see the email come in today, check your spam folder or your junk folder, because sometimes they land there. And this is an important bit of information for you. So again, thank you all for joining us, and I hope to see you all soon.
Thank you.